are an influencer. Does anyone believe that actually tonight? Like that you are actually an influencer? Edith does. Oh, a lot. Okay, I honestly expect. Okay. Adi also thinks she is. I really thought I would be the only one, and I was going to have to make a joke about like, oh, just me. Okay, but I'm glad. So I only have to convince like half of you that you actually are. So Daniel asked me to talk about becoming an influencer, right? And the whole part of that language was a play on words. But we're just going to jump right in, and I'm just going to show you how to grow your Instagram up to 10,000 followers in 3 days. And I'm glad that joke actually landed, because that was also, I was like, oh, they may miss it.
Are you going to show us how to get it?
Yeah, exactly. I can show you how to download it first, and then. But for real, this is the cultural context that we live in right now, right? That more than ever in my lifetime, I've been told and heard and been expected to have followers, to have people following me and paying attention to what I'm doing. And that's just not been a thing. That wasn't a thing when I was really young, and it became a thing as I was a teenager, and now in my 20s, everywhere I look, that is what the expectation is. And the crazy thing is that I haven't heard it from the church, right? I've heard that I need followers from culture. I've been fed it by culture and social media. And the truth is that it's all based on a lie, right? And so that lie is that culture says that if I amass a following of a couple hundred, a couple thousand, a couple 100,000, depending on the scale of influence that you want, if you have those followers, then that makes you an influencer, right? And then if you are an influencer, then that brings you value. That's the lie that we've been taught. I think everyone from this side of the room can for sure even just relate to that more. Yeah, even some of these college kids, I mean, it feels different. I'm 26, and it feels different now than even when I...
Oh, right, all the room for sure.
So culture says that if you have this following, you are an influencer, and if you are an influencer, you have value. But it's a lie. The truth is that you have value because Jesus loves you. And as cheesy and as corny as that sounds, it's true. And if we truly believe that our identity is in Christ, which is a phrase we hear all the time, put your identity in Christ. We teach youth kids that from a young age. We're like, place your identity in Christ. It's this phrase that gets really overused. But if we truly believe, what that truly means is that we believe in the deepest part of ourselves that our value doesn't come from anything we can do or accomplish or achieve, but it comes from Jesus loving us first, right? And so we believe this at Lakeway. We believe that each of us is called to lead and be an influencer as followers of Jesus. So we believe this not just because you paid $10 to come to a leadership talk or because we grabbed you one time to serve communion. That doesn't necessarily, that's not why you're a leader, right? You're a leader because you're a follower of Jesus. Did it go up there yet? I already said, yeah. We believe that because we follow Jesus, we are called to be leaders so you don't get an out. That's for you and for I also don't get an out. We see this in Matthew 28, 19 and 20. It says this. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Now, this is one of the most quoted passages of the New Testament, as far as I've known growing up. I've heard this passage taught a ton, and it's often used to encourage believers. This is Jesus sending out his disciples, and it's used now, 2,000 years later, to encourage believers to follow in the same mission and to do the same thing, right? And that mission, innately, in this passage, is to be a leader. Who knows that making disciples takes leadership? It takes initiative. It takes stepping out in faith, and it takes going in front of people. And so many times, we sit through a talk on that Great Commission. I've heard that 1,000 times. And I'm on staff at a church, and I still hear it taught sometimes. And I still go, well, yeah, but that's somebody else. Or I still sit there and I'm like, well, the nations, I mean, that's like what missionaries are for, and that's not really what I do. Or like, because I am on staff at a church, I equate it to, well, that's not me, but that's Daniel and that's Jerry, that's the higher ups, and I count myself out of that. But I see this passage as a call to be a leader, and we can't count ourselves out of it. Because, truly, we follow Jesus, we're called to be leaders, so you don't get an out. Daniel taught us a definition in week 1, that leadership equals influence. Leadership equals influence. So I want us to ask this question. How are you influencing the people around you? How are you influencing the people around you? Because the bottom line is that every single one of us in this room, people are watching you and listening to you, whether or not you recognize it or accept that role or position or not. And the reality is pretty black and white, that you are either a good influence or you're a bad influence. My mama taught me that one, and to who to hang out with. But I have to admit that I've been both in different seasons of life, right? Like, I've been a good influence and I've also been a bad influence. Can anyone else relate to, did anyone else going to admit that they were ever a bad influence? Oh, Daniel, yeah. Yeah, for sure. So at my best, I think that I look back even over the last few years, and I think that I have been a healthy influence to a handful of high school kids who I was there for in a transitional time of their life, and like was a constant in their life and got to speak into their lives. And I think there are several people that would point to me as that. That's like my healthy side. That's like the good influence side. At my worst, I once made the decision to lead a Chinese fire drill that ended up having my car roll in neutral into the street as I rounded the last car. So at my worst, not a good influence, right? That was a bad example. But needless to say, I've been both, right? I've been on both sides of that coin. So what are we doing to be healthy influences? Because I know that left on my own, like I will end up being a bad influence. I push the rules to the edge. I go against the grain. I have to do a lot of work to stay a healthy influence. And this, I think, is where rule of life comes in. So we're going to talk about this next week. Daniel and I are going to kind of tag team it. But I think that our health, physically, mentally, spiritually, has so much to do with how we are influencing in general. But we're going to jump into that more next week. I want to spend some time tonight correcting 2 lies that I have believed myself, and I think hopefully others can relate to, that have kept me from seeing myself as a person of influence. And so here are the 2 lies. Number 1, I don't have my life all together, so why should anyone listen to me? I just want you to read that, and if you relate to it, great. If not, then you can move on. Number 2, I don't have a platform. There is no one listening to me. So the first one I kind of want to address and correct by looking at John 4. In John 4, we've all heard this story. This is the story of Jesus approaching the Samaritan woman at the well and asking for water. And I just always heard this story hinge and focus on the cultural context, right? That it was a big deal because Jesus was a Jew and she was a Samaritan, and those people groups did not get along, and that was probably the biggest part of the story, much less the fact that he was a man, she was a woman, they were alone at the well. Like, all of this cultural context, that was wild for their cultural context, and that's always been the focus of that story. But I kind of want to focus on the second half. I want to look at what happens after Jesus tells her about the living water that he has to offer. We all know that story. That's what he offers her instead of the physical water. So in verse 28, we see this. Then, leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, "Come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?" They came out of the town and made their way toward him. And a little further down, we see in verse 39. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them. And he stayed there 2 days. And because of his words, many more became believers. Okay, so here's a woman with a notable bad reputation. And she was an outcast to culture, her cultural context at least. Her lifestyle was far from normal, and everyone in the town kind of knew it. Everyone knew that, if you remember, she had multiple husbands, and the man she was living with was not her husband. And the town knew. And when she encounters Jesus in this profound way, the first thing she does is she turns around, runs back to town, and starts telling people of her transformation. And this isn't in the text specifically, but I can't help but think that the people were skeptical, right? They knew who this woman was. They really didn't think that if they should trust her. They questioned her testimony because of her life that she'd been living, the way she'd been living. But the woman's words made them curious enough to make their way out of the town toward Jesus. They were listening. And when they experienced him themselves, they believed. And she is the one who primed them to believe, right? Without her going out front, Jesus chose to let her go back and say something first. And it was because of this woman's influence that these people believed and were able to actually consume what Jesus was coming to say and speak. And so this story became, it kind of shifted to me, right? So the story is now a story of influence. It's someone who was not put together, being used by God to influence others toward Jesus. And so I spent some time trying to just think of what is a modern culture 2020 kind of reference that could tie this story to our modern context. And only one name came to mind, and it's Kanye. So if you don't know who Kanye West is, Kanye West. Yeah, sorry. Talk to this side for a second, yeah.
We know
Kanye West is a rapper who has had such hit bangers as Stronger, Power. I know Daniel likes that one a lot. And other songs like I Am a God. He put out a record, that was 2 albums ago, I think. And all of these songs are explicit, and I can't suggest any of them to you because just in right mind, I would not tell you to go watch those or listen to those. Needless to say, he put a record out last year with the title called Jesus is King. Blue and gold, really simple, Jesus is King. And everyone I knew, the media, everyone went crazy. Everyone's really surprised, excited. And along with all that, everyone is extremely skeptical. And the hardest ones on him was the church, right? It was Christian bubble culture, questioning whether or not he was for real, or is he somehow weirdly trying to make money off of it. But it's no one makes money off a gospel record. So it's that's never been a thing, right? And so it would be an interesting PR move if that was his move. But I had to make a conscious decision. I did make a conscious decision in several conversations to just kind of speak up and say, you know what, I have to be, I'm going to choose to believe what he's saying. Because I think that, yes, it doesn't necessarily line up with where he's been, but I'm going to trust that God's actually working in his life, and it doesn't actually change any of the situation. He could still come out in a couple months and be like, that was all, a PR move. But I hope not, right? And I'm going to hope for the best. The craziest part, right, is similar to that story, everyone was listening, right? So the media is listening. Christians are listening to this record. Just like the story, she came back, started proclaiming things. Everyone was there. They were there to live. They were kind of skeptical, but they were listening. And so it's crazy because I actually think, I didn't look up stats, but I'm pretty confident that album has been streamed and reached more people with the gospel than any Christian radio song last year, right? When you really look at how much reach Kanye has, super interesting, and I hope that he continues to play worship music. It's going to be awesome. But the point of all of this is this. You do not have to have this is how I feel when you're up here. You do not have to have your life together to be an influencer for Jesus. And I know that the end of that sounds a little cheesy, but the point is this, is that you don't need a degree. You don't need previous leadership experience. The only requirement is that you've experienced the grace and the goodness of Jesus. And that by having that experience, you have everything you need to be a powerful voice for the gospel. And I think if we actually believed that more, we would be bolder with our story, right? Because your story is actually everything you need. The woman in the Bible did not even have the Bible to point to quantify, to qualify what she was saying. It was purely her story, purely her testimony. And so here is like the second lie that I want us to walk away from corrected, right? Lie number 2. I don't have a platform and there's no one listening to me. So here's the truth to kind of combat that lie. Platform doesn't dictate influence. Platform does not dictate influence. So when we look at the life of Jesus, there are kind of 4 main venues that I see that he spent time in. There's the marketplace, like the public places, right, that he was, the street, right? He was walking a lot because there weren't cars back then. The second sphere, kind of the second venue, was he spent a lot of time with crowds, right? He spent time with crowds crammed into houses where people were cutting holes in roofs trying to drop their friends in. He spent time with crowds around a lake because it got so crazy he had to get in a boat because there's this crowd just following him, wanting what he's offering, eating up his every word. 3, we see him spend time with his disciples, right? These are his people. These are some of my people. And like he ate, he traveled with he traveled with them. He did life with them, right? And the 4th venue is that he spent time with his few, right? So he had James, Peter, and John that out of the disciples were even his closer inner circle and his core. So when we start to look at these venues that Jesus inhabited and that he spent time in, it's kind of ironic that on paper, Jesus' platform, when he was alive, while he was walking on this earth, was not huge. He had a lot of limitations as a first century Jewish man compared to even just what we have access to reach as in 2020, right? Like us sitting here in this room have access to, through the internet, to way more people physically or tangibly than he did when he was walking the earth. And yet we go through life constantly believing that lie, that because our platform doesn't look like someone else's, right? Because we don't have 100,000 subscribers or followers on a piece of social media, that it means we don't have influence. And that's just a straight up lie. And so I want to establish the 4 venues that I think kind of mirror the life of Jesus, where he spent his time, that I believe every single one of us has been called to influence, right? And so those 4 venues are these: our city, the crowd, the church, and your core. So I'm going to break these down. Our city, you can leave that up there for a while. So the city includes every public place you go, right? This is where you work, where you go out to eat. This is the gym, for those of us who choose to participate in that. This is the football game. This is the party. This is the coffee shop, right? These are the public places that we engage with people specifically outside of the church and specifically people that are possibly different than us. And so when I think of my city and influence, I think about where I specifically live, which I live actually in downtown Bryan. So it's like the furthest away you could be in this town from where I work, which is great because I have a little commute. But I lived down there 3 years, and just a piece of the reality of living downtown Bryan that I was exposed to was houseless people pretty early on. So 3 years ago, move in. My roommate and I, like probably week 2 of living there, go downstairs to go over to RX and get. I actually don't know if RX was actually open yet, but anyways, we're getting lunch, and we get stopped by a man who is very rough looking, and he stops us, asks us for money. We do the whole pocket pat, like I don't have any cash, and like hoping that he'll just kind of leave us alone. And my roommate just kind of casually, off the cuff, says like, we don't have any cash, but could you want to pray with us? Like, and he was kind of timid, and I thought I was like, oh, that's good. Like, that's a good question. Like, good move. Yeah. We don't have any money, but good move. And the guy, like, surprised both of us. He, like, reared his head up, like, got kind of aggressive and, like, backed up and was like, man, you Christians only ever want to pray, and you won't ever actually help me with what I need. And it was this moment that has stuck with me. Like, years later, it's affected the way that I treat and approach houseless people. And so people find themselves in that situation. And that's even something I've learned through a lot of their stories. Like, no one wants that. No one desires that. And that's a whole nother talk. That's a whole nother subject. But my point being is, it's this, I took it after that moment, after that moment of that line that just stuck with me, like, no one ever actually wants to just help. Is that sometimes they just have tangible needs that need to be met, and that we don't need to question, how we are reaching a tangible need. And so for me, it turned into conviction very quickly. And so I kind of decided from there on out that, like, part of a good, solid way that I can influence my city is by, in the small way of how I treat people I encounter like this, and how I change the perspective of what a follower of Jesus acts like and responds, right? And so I kind of made that my personal mission. I'm not calling anyone else to do this, what I'm about to say, because honestly, it's ended me up in some terrible situations. But it truly has. It'll get you in trouble, right? But I kind of made it my goal to shift people's perspective of Christians in that situation. And so, yes, it has gotten, I have some crazy stories of times where I have given away absurd amounts of money to people that probably didn't manage it well. I've given rides to people to places that I probably shouldn't have been driving them at night. But it all came from this question, right, of I stopped, and this is just my choice, so I'm not pushing this on you, but it's just, it was a posture of me choosing to start to ask, well, what do you need? Because that takes them off guard every time. Well, what do you, I'm hungry. I'm like, okay, let's go get some food. And then what else do you need? And I'm like, well, I need a ride to, and that's how I end up in the car with them. But anyway, the point, you go down that list, right, and they're kind of like surprised, like, oh, you actually want to help. Yeah, exactly. I have done that before as well. Anyways, but it's this, it takes them by surprise, right? And if they, and I try and make it known. Specifically, I can think of two stories when I was in a car with someone that he did straight up ask me, he's like, why did you actually give me a ride? And I was straight up like, I didn't say Christian, and that's just a personal choice. I said, I'm a follower of Jesus, and I think that this is what he would have done. So that's what I'm doing. And in the end of that story, unfortunately, is that I think I may have assisted something I don't want to be a part of by dropping him off somewhere. But the bottom line is my intent, right? In my heart, my posture of what I was trying to communicate to him, and the way that I was wielding the influence that I had in that moment, right? That's not broad scale solving homelessness. That is an individual level, using and wielding the influence I had in that moment to change a perspective. And so now homelessness is a real thing in our town, but I also get, because I spend half my life on this side of town, in South College Station, that it's just not the same, right? That context is not the same context that anyone living on this half of town realizes. Sorry, even most of Bryan, I lived in Bryan several years of my growing up years, and have never experienced homelessness. So what does that look like for us down here? I spend half my time down here. One of the places I spend the most time is Arc's Pizza, after nights like this or like Lakeway. And something that I've been convicted of lately, and this is another way of a public sphere wielding influence in a positive way, is we've all had that waiter or waitress who's just slow, gets everything wrong, probably spills a drink on you at one point. There's one particular person at RX that's done that to us multiple times. Right? Yeah. But we've all had that waiter, that waitress, right, that's struggling, and they are constantly met all day. They're treated terribly, right, like all day by people. And there is an opportunity there, I think, for us to redeem some of our influence. That if we meet that person with grace and with patience, there's an opportunity to shift a whole perspective. And there's also an opportunity for boldness that I think that I have not done a good enough job at, that I'm challenging myself to do, because we are there so often, is to be more relational with someone like a waiter, right? Like, if someone in the public sphere is serving you, yes, and you're paying them, but there's an opportunity. Margie is really good at this. It's like remember, you are. She's really good at remembering names, even a waiter, where I'm like, yes, please, I want my pizza, and like I get really caught up in that. But I'm gonna try soon. I guess I better, if I'm saying, well, I better, I say that, I better. But really, it's as simple. My point in bringing all of this up, even of RX, is just, it's as simple of, we go to this place all the time. We know some of the people there because we go there so much. And I've never said, hey, you should come to this thing that we do on Thursdays. and they know we're a crew. Like they know, we all show up together, and I don't know if they
give us menus anymore.
they don't even give us menus anymore. Yeah. And I don't know if they know, we're with the church. I think I've told someone before, like, oh, we're a small group, like from the church across the street. But there's a chance there to be bold and to just invite someone. And if they ask what church is, or not church, sorry. If they ask if Thursday thing is church, you can just kind of be like, kind of, but not really. It's like cool church. So you should come anyways. Yeah, it's like cool church. So I think there's an opportunity there in any sphere, in any situation that, I kind of give you the extremes, homelessness and a waiter. And in my view, in that public sphere, there are opportunities for us to redeem our influence. So the second venue is the crowd. This is everyone who shows up on a Thursday night, right? So we have a lot of faithful believers who come every week. All of you. I see you almost every week. And we love you, and we're so glad that you come every week. But we have a lot of people who show up pretty often even who have no idea what we're talking about or what Daniel's talking about or what we're singing about, and we love that. That's what Lakeway is meant. That's who Lakeway is meant for. Like, it's meant for us to gather and worship, yes, but it's meant for the people who have no idea what we're doing. We want them to keep coming back. And so these are kind of the fringe people, right? These are the people that, like I said, they got invited off some offhand comment, and they're just kind of on the fringe. This crowd is another venue of influence that we're being called to reach, I think. And so there's a person that came to mind pretty quickly when I started thinking about, like, how have I engaged our crowd? You know what I mean? Like, how have I, like, because I can't teach this if I haven't done it, or if I don't at least have the expectation of myself to step out and do it. And this girl came to mind who worked for my parents, and she moved here from another state and kind of quickly got in our crew of friends because she didn't know anybody, and pretty quick, I guess it was like last fall, she decided to make some life changes, and she knew we all went to the same church, and she was basically like, I kind of want to go, and sweet, everyone kind of freaked out, and we're like, oh yeah, let's go. And she came. We had, like, I remember even just last fall having like some solid conversations after, like heart level conversations that just had never happened before. We had known her for a while, and anyways, fast forward about a month ago, she moved away and kind of like dropped off the face. Sometimes people just kind of like, they don't tell you they're leaving. Y'all may have known. I didn't know. I knew she was leaving at some point, but anyways, the point of this story is that she left. And about a week and a half ago, like 8 of us got a text, and several of them are in this room, like Jonathan, Katie, Margie, and I got a text from this girl who, we didn't really tell bye. She left, and it was just this. It wasn't super long, but it was just expressing like, hey, I never really got to tell you, but each of you played a role in my life and impacted me in a healthy, positive way, and I appreciate it. And like, I'm sorry I didn't say bye, but thank you. And it was just like really, like, I cannot specifically, I think the girls more so hung out, like did a better job of like actually pastoring / just being a good friend. But it was this moment of like, I have no idea where her heart is actually at. Like there was no moment of like, we baptized her, and and there's this, there wasn't that, because that's unfortunately not usually reality, right? The reality is that influence isn't instant, right? It's not instant. And so it so often takes time. And we may not see the fruit of that influence. But this time it was cool because we did get a little text. It was like, hey, I appreciate you a lot. You're impactful in my life. Great, awesome. We need to do this more often. And so we have a call to influence the crowd and the fringe people, right? Like, and I think there's just a tangible way that specifically the people in this room, this is very practical, but on a Thursday, you see someone sitting alone. You see someone, you know what I mean? That is our job in this room, to immediately, when Lakeway is over, to find that person and at least get their name, if not more than that. So that moves us on into the next venue. Next, we have the church. And that's you all right here that I'm calling the church. I know it's a little confusing because we call Thursday night church too, but this is the church, right? You're the disciplined, engaged, bought-in members of Lakeway. And there's a wide demographic in this room, and I love that. It's beautiful, and like we're so happy that is our reality. And the main way that I see our calling to influence each other here in this room is encouragement. It's one word or one moment, taking, going above and beyond or kind of out of your way to encourage and care for someone else kind of in this realm of leadership that you're in, whether or not you're realizing it or not. I am not great at this. Encouragement is not one of my natural gifts, we'll say that. But as I was thinking through this, this statement just hit me like a train. But encouragement is not a personality trait. It's a choice. Encouragement is not a personality trait. It's a choice. And it's something that I've been super convicted by and super challenged by because some people, I do think it comes more naturally to certain people. Margie, Katie, I just know them better. Like, they are some good encouragers. Like, just constantly really good at lifting people up around them. Austin, great encourager. Like, really lifts people up constantly in a very natural way that for me is just not natural. So I've been convicted by it, I've been challenged by it, and for a few weeks now. And yesterday it kind of popped up. An opportunity arose, and we have a lot of funerals up here at church recently. It's really sad, but I've been, because of my position over the last 5 years, I've probably worked 100 funerals. Like, it's a lot of funerals to have to get. And like, I feel now what a pastor feels of like having to. It is a heavy role, even when I don't know the person, it's like this weight that you just feel in the room, and it's a really it's not the most fun part of the job. But on top of that, and sometimes I play music in it, but I've never taught or preached a sermon at a funeral, which is just one of the hardest things I feel like you have to do, is to lift a room or encourage a room like that. And so it's this really difficult position. And yesterday's funeral, or was it Monday? I don't remember. Not important. Monday. Thank you. Monday's funeral. David Henry. I don't know. Some of you may not know him, but he's associate music pastor, Reverend David Henry. He's a reverend. Incredible man. I love that guy to death. He's just extremely talented because he played music at the whole funeral and preached the funeral. Like, crazy. I could not do that ever. And so it was just this impactful, heartfelt service that is really hard to do, specifically for a man that, like, he knew, but not super well, and to make it that personal and heartfelt just takes a lot of care and a lot of effort. And so I had an opportunity, like, an hour later to just catch him, and I told him, I was just like, hey, just so you know, like, that I've been to a lot of those, like, a lot, and that was one, like, so heartfelt and so personal. You killed it. Like, it was impactful to me, and I didn't even know the man, and the look on his face was like surprise and like astoundment, and I was like, this is making me feel terrible, because apparently I don't say words like this very often because he's so surprised at my attempt at encouragement. So it made me kind of sad, but it served as this reminder to me that no matter your age or stage of life, like, literally everybody needs encouragement. And that sounds kind of kitschy, but it just is so true, and it rings so true. And it literally, the age, the gap does not matter, right? Like, David is well older than me, but it goes both ways, right? And so, like, it took nothing for me to step out, besides being a little bit bold, of like, hey, you did, that was a great. So anyways, it is super impactful to him because of his face. I could tell, like, oh, he's not used to hearing that, or he definitely isn't used to hearing that from me. So that was both encouraging and saddening, and just a reminder that I need to do that for more people, not just the ones below me. I think I do that I do that better with people who are younger than me, or at least below me positionally. And I think that if we're really leaning into encouragement, it literally has no age or stage that it's limited by. And so that really is the church, and the best way that I see that realm or that venue that we can wield our influence healthfully. And so lastly, we have your core. And so this is your small group, your life group, your Sunday school class, your community group, your crew, whatever you want to call it, all these churchy words that we call these gatherings of people. But these are the people who you do life with. These are a few of my people that I'm just blessed to be part of, and they know you very well. They're able to speak life into you, but they're also there to call you out on your crap, which this group of people also finds a little bit too much joy in calling you out occasionally. But Jesus had a core, you need a core, right? Like that, if Jesus had it, we better be replicating it. And so if you don't already, I can't stress enough how important a small group is. For me, it was a personal choice I made, a personal shift I made about 3 years ago. I kind of went to Jana and it was kind of the resurgence of some of the small groups, and I just went to Jana and said, "Hey, I feel like I need to do this. Just put me wherever you think like I'd be useful." Or I didn't even know what to say. I didn't even know what I was asking. I didn't even know what I was asking for. And she put me in this group. I get there the first night, and the group of people, it's a motley crew, and none of us are alike. We don't have anything in common. Conversation is painful, it is awkward. And I remember sitting there kind of at the end of the first time, I was like, well, this ain't gonna last very long. Like, this is probably gonna dissolve because this is so awkward. And no one's gonna put themselves willingly through this much pain again. But literally, it felt like that, Rob, I promise you. But we kept showing up, right? Like, we committed, and specifically a core of us kept showing up. And showing up was the hardest part, it was the only thing required of us, was to show up. Like, what we were bringing to the table did not, you didn't have to, it wasn't dependent on what you were sharing or what what value you were bringing, but you were there, you were committed to the group. And so 3 years later, I can point to a group of people who I can confidently say have pushed me further. And hopefully, I would look back at them and be like, yes, you pushed us further in certain ways too. Right? Oh, a little bit? Great. But all of this is because I truly think we still even have a calling to influence those closest to us. Like, sometimes I feel like sometimes those closest to us get ignored. Like, I think about family and the way that as you become an adult, my relationship with my parents has shifted a lot. And I didn't even plan to share this, but I've had to push. I wanted more out of I saw their relationship with their parents, and I was like, I don't really. That's not what I want our relationship to be like. And they kind of saw it too. We kind of met halfway, and we have these conversations now. They're these heart level conversations that it took effort for me to kind of boldly step up to my parents. They're my parents. And they love me, and they did a great job. I think they did a fine job raising me, right? But it was this kind of awkward tension of well, that's kind of their job. That's what I always viewed it as. But I truly think influence goes both ways, and that step had to come from both of us willing to want that relationship to look different and to look stronger, specifically as we both age. And one other thing about my parents, actually, now that we're on the topic. If you think that I was crazy for some of the things with homeless people that I've stepped into, I had a situation with them where someone came into their kitchen. They have a kitchen in downtown Bryan. Someone walked in. We're talking to them for a bit. Kind of gave them $10. Said, "Hey, if you can get to the church, the church can help you. We promise. Get there, they'll help you." We kind of thought, he kind of left. I get a call the next day. My mom's like, "Well, James is back, and we have him doing dishes." I was like, y'all are crazy. And so, anyway, if you think I'm crazy for some of the things I've done, they're crazier. That is who I learned it from. So once again, just to kind of wrap up, these are our venues: our city, the crowd, the church, and your core. And so our purpose in kind of identifying these venues is to understand that to actually influence anyone, you have to be humble. Our first step is humility. Because humility is attractive. If you're humbly serving people in each of these venues, and you're pulling people from the city, you're bringing them into the crowd, and then you're pulling them with you into the church, you're pulling them with you into a core, we are living out our calling, right, to be an influencer for Jesus. So if nothing has stuck with you tonight, if I've been rambling, it's hard to tell sometimes. Daniel, I feel you. This is pretty tough. just hear this. I want you to walk away knowing that you are a person of influence, whether or not you're recognizing it or not. And that as followers of Jesus, it's our responsibility and it's our calling to influence people through the different venues of our life and bring them to Jesus. That's all I got.
Amen.